Someone reading this right now is thinking, I'm too good for this world. And I need to tell you something no one will ever say to your face. Your kindness already made someone else rich. Someone already used your yes to build their life. Someone slept peacefully while you lay awake, running through every way you could not let them down. And in the morning, they didn't think about you once, not once. Let that land. Don't move past it. Because that's not a tragic accident. That's a system. And you've been living inside it for years, calling it loyalty, calling it love, calling it just who you are. Here's what's actually true. There are two versions of you that have existed inside the same body your entire life. Version 1 explains himself, apologizes before he's accused, gives more when giving has already failed, waits by the phone, absorbs the silence, tells himself that if he's just patient enough, just good enough, just available enough, eventually the world will recognize it. Eventually, they'll see. Version 1 is not stupid. He is not weak in the way people mean when they say weak. He is, in many ways, the most human thing in the room, and that is exactly what makes him so easy to destroy. Version 2 doesn't announce himself, doesn't explain his decisions, doesn't chase people who've already shown him who they are. He has learned, through real loss, through the specific exhaustion of being drained by people he loved, that his presence is a privilege, not a guarantee, not a given, a privilege. And the moment he stopped making himself constantly available, something shifted. People started treating him differently, not because he became cruel, because he became scarce. You already know which version has been running your life. You've known for a while. That uncomfortable feeling in your chest right now, that's recognition, not disagreement. This is not motivation. This is not self-help. This is the conversation you have at midnight with someone who already walked through the fire and came back with something you need to hear. Drop this in the comments before we go any further. I will not break again. Because the first thing we need to talk about is where your heart has been going. Not whether you have one, you clearly do. That's never been the problem. The problem is the address. Look, there's a psychological phenomenon that nobody in your life will name for you, because naming it requires admitting they've benefited from it. It's called devaluation through availability. The mechanism is this: the more freely something is given, the less it is valued. Not because humans are monsters, though some are, but because the human brain is a pattern recognition machine that assigns worth based on scarcity and cost. This is not cynicism. This is neuroscience. This is documented in every relationship dynamic you've ever watched collapse when one person gave everything and the other gave just enough to keep them giving. Machiavelli understood this in the 15th century when he wrote that generosity, when practiced without restraint, ultimately destroys the one who gives it. He wasn't being cruel, he was being accurate. He watched princes bankrupt themselves trying to be loved by people who only respected power, and he took notes. The note that matters here is this: when you give without limit, you don't earn loyalty, you earn expectation. And expectation left unchecked curdles into entitlement, and entitlement will consume you with a clean conscience. Here's the truth about ungrateful people that no one tells you. They are not hunting for your money, your time, or your labor. They are hunting for your guilt. Because guilt is the mechanism. Guilt is what keeps the supply chain running. Every time you gave more after being taken for granted, you weren't being generous. You were being managed. The moment you felt bad for pulling back, the moment you second-guessed your own boundaries because you didn't want to seem selfish, that was the trap closing. And this is the part no one tells you. The ungrateful don't see themselves as predators. That's what makes it so effective. They've simply learned, through years of unconscious conditioning, that your discomfort is a resource, that your need to be seen as good is a lever. They pull it. You move. Nobody calls it manipulation because it's dressed in the language of need, right? So here is the reframe that changes everything. Your care is not an obligation. It is not the price of admission to your own relationships. It is a privilege extended to people who have demonstrated they know how to hold it. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must learn how not to be good, meaning how to withhold goodness strategically, because goodness distributed without discernment is not virtue. It is weakness wearing virtue's clothing. Every time you gave yourself to someone who handed nothing back, you weren't being noble. You were teaching them your floor, and they built a basement underneath it. I know that sounds cold. I know you were raised to believe that giving unconditionally is the highest form of character. But unconditional giving to conditional people is not virtue. It's self-erasure with a moral justification attached. The shift starts here. Your kindness is not infinite. It is not owed. It is not the thing that makes you worthy of love. And the moment you start treating it like the rare, finite, powerful resource that it actually is, the entire dynamic of your relationships begins to change. Not because you became someone different, because you finally stopped pretending you weren't someone worth protecting. Drop this in the comments. My kindness has limits. Because what comes next, what we're about to get into, is what happens when you take that pain, everything you've been carrying, and you stop letting it be the thing that breaks you. Look, nobody tells you this part, nobody frames it this way, but the people who came out of the fire stronger than they went in, they didn't have less pain than you. They had a different relationship with it. Think about the last time something really broke you, not inconvenienced you, broke you. A betrayal, a silence that lasted too long. Someone you gave everything to who looked right through you when it mattered most. You remember that feeling, that specific weight in your chest that made even breathing feel like work. You remember lying there thinking, why does this keep happening to me? Here's what they never tell you about that moment. It was the most valuable thing that ever happened to you, and you almost threw it away by calling it suffering. Pain is the only teacher that never lies. Every other source of wisdom in your life, people, books, advice, philosophy, can be wrong, can be biased, can be given with an agenda. Pain has no agenda. Pain is the pure, unfiltered signal that something in your map of reality does not match the territory. It is the most honest feedback system you will ever have access to. And most people, version 1 people, spend enormous energy trying to escape it, numb it, explain it away, or weaponize it into a story about how they've been wronged. The difference between people who get broken by their pain and people who get built by it is not resilience in the motivational poster sense. It's not toughness. It's alchemy. It's the specific decision, and it is a decision, even when it doesn't feel like one, to ask a different question. Not, why did this happen to me, but what is this teaching me that I couldn't have learned any other way? Machiavelli wrote that there is nothing more difficult to execute, nor more dangerous to carry out, than the introduction of a new order of things. He was talking about political transformation. But the most dangerous new order you will ever introduce is the one inside yourself. Picture the last night you spent replaying a betrayal, running it forward and backward, looking for the moment you missed the signal. That specific sleeplessness, that is the exact raw material of transformation, if you choose to use it as data instead of suffering. The decision to stop being someone that pain passes through and start being someone that pain sharpens. That is the new order of things he was describing. Right. Here's the psychological mechanism underneath this. When you experience betrayal or loss, and you stay in the victim position, and I say that without judgment, because that position is seductive, it's comfortable, it feels like it protects you. What you're actually doing is outsourcing your power to the person who hurt you. You are saying, consciously or not, my state depends on what you did. My trajectory depends on your choices. My future is shaped by your failure. And as long as that's true, they own you, even after they're gone, especially after they're gone. The transmutation, and this is the part that changes everything, happens when you take the energy of that pain and redirect it, not suppress it, not perform toughness over it. Redirect it. Every sleepless night becomes research. Every betrayal becomes data about what you will never allow again. Every scar becomes a boundary marker, not a wound to hide, but a wall you built from what you survived. Machiavelli understood this when he described how the greatest leaders of his time were not those who had suffered least. They were those who had been forged by adversity and came out knowing exactly what they were made of. He wrote that fortune favors the bold, but what he meant underneath that is that fortune cannot touch the person who has already survived their worst. And just so we're clear about what's actually happening here, this is not about becoming hard. Hard things break. This is about becoming dense, pressure-formed, the kind of person that difficulty lands on and slides off of, not because nothing touches you, but because you've already metabolized worse. If you're still here and you feel something shifting inside you, hit subscribe, because we go much deeper on this every week, and you're going to want to be in the room for what comes next. Your pain is not your identity, but it is your currency. Every person who ever underestimated you, every relationship that cost you more than it gave, every morning you woke up depleted by someone who slept fine. That is stored energy, documented in every manipulation you ever survived. And it is waiting to be converted. The question is never whether you've suffered enough to deserve power. The question is whether you're willing to stop letting your suffering be the end of the sentence and start letting it be the beginning of a different one. Because the people who broke you handed you the exact blueprint of what you will never tolerate again. And that blueprint, right? That is worth more than anything they could have given you voluntarily. Drop this in the comments. My pain builds power. Because here's what comes after you stop letting pain own you. And this one is harder. This one is the one that nobody wants to admit they need. You have to kill something that's been keeping you small for years. The hunger, the need, the bottomless, exhausting, dignity-costing need to be understood. You've explained yourself to someone who had already decided what they thought of you. I know you have. We all have. You felt the misunderstanding forming in real time. You could see it in their face, in the way they were processing what you said. And something inside you activated. That urgent, almost physical need to clarify, to add context, to make sure they saw the real intention behind the action. So you talked, you explained, you gave them more information, more access, more of your interior world. And when it was over, they used exactly what you gave them to build a more sophisticated case against you. That's not bad luck. That's the mechanism. Here's the truth that took me a long time to accept. The need to be understood is one of the most effective leashes ever attached to a powerful mind. Because it sounds like self-advocacy, it feels like honesty. It presents itself as the mature, emotionally intelligent thing to do. Communicate, be transparent, let people see you clearly. And underneath all of that, buried where you can't easily see it, is pure psychological dependency. The need to be understood is the need for external validation, dressed in the language of authenticity. And every time you fed it, you handed the other person a little more control over your emotional state. Machiavelli wrote that the wise prince does not explain his decisions to those who lack the capacity to judge them. He wasn't being arrogant, he was being precise. He understood that explanation is a transfer of power, that the moment you justify yourself to someone, you have implicitly accepted their right to evaluate you. You have made yourself subject to their verdict. And once you've done that, you can't take it back. You've already moved from sovereign to defendant. Right. Think about the specific texture of this. Think about the last time you explained yourself to someone who wasn't asking in good faith. You could feel it, couldn't you? That something was off about the conversation, that they weren't really listening, they were waiting, collecting. And yet, you kept going, because stopping felt like abandonment. Like if you just found the right combination of words, the right framing, the right tone, they would finally get it, finally see you. They were never going to see you. That was never the game being played. And this is the part no one tells you. Every explanation you gave to someone who wasn't operating in good faith was a gift to them. You revealed your fears. You showed them what you needed their approval for. You demonstrated exactly which accusations landed, because those are the ones you rush to defend against. You essentially handed them a manual. Here is how to make me feel guilty. Here is what I'm insecure about. Here is the exact pressure point that will make me give you more than you deserve. That's called DARVO. Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. And it only works when the target keeps engaging, keeps explaining, keeps trying to correct the record. The moment you stop explaining, the mechanism breaks. Because the mechanism runs on your participation. Machiavelli was precise about this. Ambiguity is a form of protection. When people cannot fully read you, cannot predict you, cannot map your interior landscape, they cannot manipulate what they cannot access. Power does not explain itself. Power simply exists and lets others construct whatever interpretation they need to. The interpretation is not your responsibility. And just so we're clear about what's actually happening here, when you finally stop, when you actually kill this need, it's not that you become cold or distant or unknowable in some performative way. It's that you reclaim the territory of your own mind. You stop living in the gap between who you are and whether someone else has correctly perceived who you are. That gap is rented office space for everyone who ever wanted to own you. That gap is where manipulators operate. The moment you close it, the moment you become genuinely indifferent to whether they understand you or not, you become, in the most precise psychological sense, ungovernable. Which, as we covered when we talked about what happens when pain stops owning you, is the foundation everything else gets built on. I know this one is uncomfortable. I know you were taught that being understood is how you connect, how you're known, how you matter to people. And for the right people, the ones who are actually there in good faith, that's still true. But you have been spending the majority of your explaining energy on exactly the wrong audience, on people who had already decided, on people who needed you to keep talking so they could keep taking. No apology, no explanation, just distance. That's power. Drop this in the comments. My silence speaks power. Because now we need to talk about what happens when you've stopped explaining. And the next instinct kicks in, the one that's even harder to admit, the one where you don't explain yourself anymore, but you still reach, you still check. You still find yourself waiting for them to notice that you've changed. You've checked your phone for a message that was never coming, not once, dozens of times, maybe hundreds. That specific ritual, the unlock, the check, the small collapse when there's nothing, the lock, and then 12 minutes later, the unlock again. You told yourself you were just staying available, that you were keeping the door open, that reaching out one more time wasn't desperation, it was just caring. Being the bigger person, not giving up on someone. Here's what was actually happening. You were begging, just quietly enough that you could call it something else. And I say that not to humiliate you, but because the reframe is everything. Because the moment you can see begging for what it is, not as a moral failure, but as a psychological trap with a very specific mechanism, you can finally step out of it. The trap is called anxious attachment. And it doesn't announce itself as weakness. It announces itself as love, as loyalty, as the refusal to abandon people. It feels noble from the inside. It feels like you're the one who stays, the one who tries, the one who doesn't give up when things get difficult. And meanwhile, from the outside, from the position of the person you're reaching toward, it reads as availability without consequence. It reads as, I can treat this person however I want, and they will still be here. You trained them to see you as disposable, not because you are, because your behavior told them you believed you were. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. People misread this constantly. They think it's about intimidation, about cruelty, about making people afraid of you in some theatrical sense. That's not what he meant. What he meant, in the precise political psychology of it, is this. Love, meaning emotional attachment, the need to be needed, the hunger for approval, makes you dependent on the other person's continued goodwill. And anyone who controls your emotional state, controls your decisions. Fear, meaning respect, meaning the genuine uncertainty of what happens if they cross you, cannot be manufactured by someone who needs you to love them back. Right? Here's the distinction that changes everything. Attachment and loyalty are not the same thing. They are, in fact, opposites. Attachment says, I need you to stay, I need you to respond, I need you to see me, because my internal state depends on it. Loyalty says, I choose to be here, not because I'll collapse if you leave, but because this relationship has earned my presence. One of those positions has power. One of those positions is a leash around your own neck that you put there yourself. Detachment, and this is where people get it wrong, is not coldness. It is not indifference in the nihilistic sense. It is not pretending you don't have feelings. Detachment is the disciplined practice of refusing to let your emotional state be determined by someone else's choices. It means you can care about someone deeply and simultaneously be completely unbothered by whether they choose to show up. Because your stability, your center, lives inside you, not in their response time, not in their approval, not in whether they finally said the thing you needed to hear. And this is the part no one tells you. Indifference, real indifference, burns colder than hatred and holds longer than love. Hatred still means you're thinking about them. Love still means you need something from them. But genuine indifference, the kind that comes after you've fully detached, that is the most psychologically devastating thing you can communicate to someone who expected to always have access to your reaction. They don't know what to do with it, because they built their entire approach to you around the assumption that you would keep reaching, keep checking, keep caring whether they responded. And when you stop, not dramatically, not with a speech, not with a final message explaining why you're pulling back, which, as we covered in the last shift, would just hand them more leverage, when you simply, quietly stop reaching, the entire dynamic inverts. Suddenly, they're the one checking. Suddenly, they're the one wondering what changed. Suddenly, your absence is louder than your presence ever was. Machiavelli understood this when he described how the prince who makes himself too accessible loses all authority, that mystery and restraint create gravity, that constant availability destroys. The person who is always there is taken for granted by definition. The person who might not be there, that person is thought about. Which somehow is not even the most dangerous part of what detachment does to your life. The most dangerous part, dangerous to every dynamic that has ever fed on your need, is what it does to your decision-making. Because when you stop needing people to approve of your choices, you start making entirely different choices. Faster, cleaner, without the fog of wondering how it will land. I know this one is hard. I know detachment sounds like giving up on people you love. It isn't. It's giving up on the version of yourself that needed them to be okay. Drop this in the comments. I choose peace over people. Because now we get to the part that manipulators are genuinely afraid of. The part that doesn't just protect you from what's already happened. It makes you structurally immune to what they would try next. Someone is in your life right now who has never respected a boundary you didn't enforce with consequences. Think about that. Think about the people around you, the ones who push, who test, who take a little more each time you give. Think about how many times you drew a line and then watched yourself erase it. Because you didn't want conflict. Because you told yourself they didn't mean it. Because the cost of holding the line felt higher than the cost of letting it slide. And so, you let it slide. And then they moved the line, and you let that slide too. And somewhere in that process, so gradual you almost missed it, you stopped being a person with boundaries and became a person with preferences. And preferences, unlike boundaries, are negotiable. Here's what they never tell you about boundaries. They are not requests. They are not suggestions. They are not the opening position in a negotiation. A boundary is a statement of consequence. It says, not, please don't do this because it hurts me, which is an appeal to someone's empathy. And empathy is exactly what manipulators do not have an adequate supply. But if you do this, here is what happens next. The difference between those two statements is the difference between vulnerability and architecture. And just so we're clear about what's actually happening when you appeal to someone's empathy instead of enforcing a consequence, you are giving a manipulator the most useful information they could possibly have. You are telling them where it hurts. You are handing them a map of your soft tissue. And they will file that information and use it at the moment it is most useful to them, which will not be a moment that is useful to you. Machiavelli wrote that men must be either pampered or crushed, that injuries should be done all at once, so that being tasted less, they offend less. The application here is uncomfortable but necessary. People who violate your boundaries are not confused. They are not misunderstanding your signals. They are testing the cost. They are running a very simple calculation. What happens when I cross this line? And if the answer is nothing, or an explanation, or a hurt look followed by forgiveness without consequence, they have their answer. They will cross it again. And a little further next time. Because there was no cost last time. Right. This is the psychological mechanism called intermittent reinforcement, and it works in both directions. When you enforce a boundary once and then abandon it, you don't teach the other person to respect the boundary. You teach them that the boundary is real approximately 30% of the time, and that persistence pays off. You have accidentally created the most powerful conditioning pattern in behavioral psychology, the variable reward schedule, and you've aimed it directly at your own exploitation. The clearest, most psychologically devastating thing you can do to a manipulator is not to fight them. It's to become boring to them. And you become boring to them the moment your boundaries are so consistent, so predictable, so absolutely reliable in their consequences, that there's no longer any game to play, no variable, no chance that this time you'll cave, no opening. Clarity, right, genuine, unambiguous clarity, terrifies manipulators because it removes their leverage entirely. They operate in the gap between what you say and what you do. The moment that gap closes, they have nothing to work with. Machiavelli understood this when he described the prince who inspires neither hope nor fear as the most dangerous position, because hope that you'll relent and fear that you won't are both forms of engagement. But a boundary enforced so consistently that it no longer even registers as a choice, that's architecture. That's a wall. And people don't spend energy negotiating with walls. And here's what they never tell you about what happens after you start enforcing boundaries with actual consequences. Some people leave. And I need you to hear this clearly. That is the point, not the unfortunate side effect. The point. Because the people who leave when you establish consequences were never there for you. They were there for access. They were there for the version of you that had no walls. And when the walls go up, they self-select out, which means your boundaries didn't cost you a relationship. They revealed that the relationship was never what you thought it was. Your presence should feel like a privilege, not a resource, not a utility, not something people can access whenever they need something and ignore when they don't. A privilege, meaning something extended selectively, conditionally, and entirely at your discretion. The moment people start treating your presence as a given, you have already lost the dynamic. Because a given has no value, a privilege has gravity. I know this one lands hard. I know some of you are thinking about specific people right now. People you love, people you've already forgiven more times than you can count. And this feels like it's asking you to become someone colder than you want to be. It's not. It's asking you to become someone safer, for yourself first, and paradoxically, for the people who actually deserve you. Because primal as it sounds, the most loving thing you can do for someone who respects you is show them exactly who you are and what you require. And the most dangerous thing you can do for someone who doesn't is keep pretending you have no requirements at all. Drop this in the comments. My boundaries protect me. Because what comes after boundaries, what comes when you've built the wall and enforced the consequences and stopped explaining yourself and stopped reaching, is the most misunderstood weapon in the entire arsenal, the one that doesn't fire bullets, the one that doesn't make a sound, the weapon that doesn't require you to say a single word, the one they never see coming because it looks exactly like nothing. You've been in a conversation where you said too much, not because you lied, not because you were wrong, because you kept talking when silence would have hit harder, held longer, and cost them more. You felt the discomfort of the pause and you filled it, immediately, reflexively, like silence was a problem to be solved rather than a weapon to be aimed. Here's what was actually happening in that pause. Power was transferring, and you handed it back. Look, we have been conditioned from childhood to treat silence as social failure, as awkwardness, as the sign that something has gone wrong in the interaction that needs to be corrected immediately. You go quiet in a conversation, and every alarm in your nervous system fires. Say something. Fix this. They'll think you're strange. They'll think you're angry. They'll think you don't care. And so you talk, and the moment you talk, you've revealed something. You've shown them that their discomfort, or even just the possibility of their discomfort, has more power over you than your own stillness. That is the entire game, right there. Machiavelli wrote that the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men around him. But the principle that lives underneath that one, the one he demonstrated rather than stated, is that the leader who speaks least in a room is almost always the one who controls it most. He watched powerful men talk themselves into weakness for decades. He documented it. He understood that words, once spoken, belong to whoever hears them, but silence belongs entirely to the one who holds it. Here's the truth about silence that nobody in your life has told you directly. Silence is not the absence of communication. It is the most sophisticated form of it. When you go quiet after someone says something designed to provoke you, when you receive an accusation, a manipulation, a test, and you simply don't respond, you are communicating something more powerful than any rebuttal could. You are communicating that their move did not reach you, that whatever they threw, it found no purchase. That you are operating from a place so stable that their words don't reorganize your interior world. And this is the part no one tells you. That kind of stillness, especially from someone who used to react, used to explain, used to scramble to manage everyone's emotional state. That stillness is genuinely unsettling to people who relied on your reactivity, because your reaction was their feedback system. Your anxiety confirmed their leverage. Your rush to fix things told them the pressure was working. The moment you stop reacting, they lose their map. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know if you're hurt. They don't know if you're done. And that uncertainty, that specific, unresolvable uncertainty, is the most psychologically potent position you can occupy in any dynamic. Machiavelli understood this when he described how the prince, who is unpredictable in his responses, commands a room differently than the one whose reactions can be anticipated. Predictability, he argued, is the enemy of power, because a predictable person can be managed. An unpredictable person cannot. And silence, deployed deliberately rather than out of avoidance, is one of the most efficient ways to become unreadable. Right. Here's the specific mechanics of how this works in real situations. Someone says something designed to destabilize you, an accusation, a subtle undermining dressed as a joke, a question that isn't really a question. Version 1 fills the silence immediately, explains, defends, laughs it off, pivots the conversation, does whatever it takes to make the discomfort stop. And in doing so, version 1 has confirmed two things simultaneously: that the comment landed, and that your primary concern is managing their perception of you rather than your own actual response. Version 2 holds the silence, not dramatically, not with a cold stare designed to intimidate. That's performance, and performance is still reactivity. Just silence. Genuine, unhurried, completely comfortable silence. Let them sit in it. Let them watch you not scramble. Let the pause stretch until it becomes undeniable that you are not going to fill it out of social obligation. And then, if you choose to respond at all, do it slowly, from a place so settled it's almost boring, because boredom is more devastating than anger. Anger means they got to you. Boredom means they never came close. And just so we're clear about what this builds over time, because this is not just about individual moments, this is about the cumulative reputation you create through consistent behavior. When people learn that you cannot be rattled, cannot be provoked into reactivity, cannot be pressured into filling silences with information they can use against you, they begin to move differently around you. More carefully, more considerately, not out of fear in any crude sense, but out of a very precise recalibration of where the power sits in the room. The quietest person, reliably, is the one everyone else is watching, which, as we covered when we talked about what happens when you stop explaining yourself, is the natural consequence of removing yourself as a readable, manageable, predictable target. I know this one creates discomfort of its own, because silence can feel like lying. It can feel like withholding. It can feel like you're being somehow dishonest by not giving people the reaction they're looking for. But here's the reframe. You are not responsible for managing other people's comfort with your stillness. You are not obligated to perform legibility for people who would use that legibility against you. The most powerful thing in any room is often the thing that makes no noise at all. Drop this in the comments. My silence controls chaos. Because what comes next, and this is the one that will genuinely disturb you, the one that cuts closest to something you've probably been proud of your entire life, is about loyalty, about what you were taught loyalty means versus what loyalty actually does to the people who practice it without limits. You've called yourself loyal like it was the finest thing about you. And maybe it was. Maybe in a world that runs on self-interest and short-term calculation, your loyalty was the thing that set you apart. The thing you pointed to when you needed to know you were still one of the good ones. You stayed. You showed up. You didn't leave when it got difficult. You kept the secret, absorbed the cost, defended the person who wasn't in the room, even when part of you knew they wouldn't do the same. I need you to hold that specific image for a moment. The moment you defended someone who wasn't there. When someone said something critical about them, something you privately agreed with, and you stepped in anyway. You absorbed the social cost. You took on the weight of their reputation as if it were your own. And later, maybe much later, you found out they never would have done the same for you. That image, that specific moment, is what we're talking about right now. Here's what they never tell you about that. Absolute loyalty is not a virtue. It is a vulnerability dressed as one. And someone in your life has already weaponized it against you. Look, loyalty in its pure, unconditional form is the psychological equivalent of handing someone your weapon and asking them to be careful with it. It removes your leverage entirely. It tells them, in the most binding language possible, that no matter what they do, you will stay. No matter how they treat you, you will defend them. No matter what the cost to you personally, you will not recalculate. And once someone knows that about you, they no longer need to work to keep you. They already have you, permanently, unconditionally, at zero ongoing cost to themselves. And this is the part no one tells you. The moment your loyalty becomes guaranteed, it stops being valuable to the person receiving it. Because value, as we established at the very beginning of this, is a function of scarcity and cost. Guaranteed loyalty has no scarcity. It requires no cost to maintain. It is, in the precise economic sense, worthless to the person who holds it, because they didn't have to earn it and they don't have to keep earning it. Machiavelli wrote that there is nothing more dangerous than to be bound to someone else's fortune. He watched men of enormous capability destroy themselves by attaching their fate irrevocably to a patron, a prince, a cause. And when that person fell or changed or simply stopped finding them useful, they fell with them, because they had made loyalty their identity. And when your loyalty is your identity, it cannot be strategic. It cannot be withdrawn. It cannot be calibrated. It is simply everything you are, handed over indefinitely to whoever was standing there when you decided that's who you were going to be. Right. Here is the psychological mechanism this creates. When you signal absolute loyalty, you trigger something in the other person that is almost involuntary. Not gratitude, not reciprocal devotion, reduced vigilance, because the human brain stops working to maintain what it believes is already secured. We value most what we had to work hardest for, and stop valuing what arrived for free. When someone has to earn your loyalty, to keep earning it, to remain worthy of it, they are engaged, attentive, accountable. The moment they know it's unconditional, that engagement drops. Not because they're villains, because they're human. And humans conserve effort when effort is no longer required. Machiavelli was precise about this when he described how the prince must never make himself so dependent on any single ally that victory or defeat becomes entirely their partner's to determine. Allegiance, he argued, belongs to your purpose, not to people. People change. People fail. People are subject to their own fears and appetites and self-interest. Your purpose does not change. And the moment you understand that loyalty is a tool in service of your purpose, rather than a character trait you owe to individuals, everything recalibrates. And just so we're clear about what this actually looks like in practice, because I know "don't be loyal" sounds like permission to become someone you don't want to be. This is not about betrayal. This is not about abandoning people who deserve you. This is about the specific, disciplined practice of keeping your loyalty conditional, visible, and earned, rather than automatic, invisible, and free. The illusion of loyalty, meaning the impression that you are deeply committed without the full reality of unconditional devotion, is more powerful than loyalty itself, because it creates the exact conditions that absolute loyalty destroys. It keeps people working, it keeps them attentive, it keeps them wondering, just slightly, whether they are still in your good graces. And that slight uncertainty is the engine of their continued investment in you, which, as we covered when we talked about what silence does to a room, is simply another form of strategic unpredictability. The person who might withdraw is more carefully handled than the person who never will. Here's the truth that cuts deepest here. The people who deserved your unconditional loyalty, the ones who would have honored it, who would have held it carefully, who would have been made better by it rather than lazier, those people never needed it to be unconditional. They were showing up anyway. They were earning it continuously without being asked. The unconditional part was never for them. It was for the ones who needed the guarantee because they knew they couldn't earn the reality. I know this one disturbs something. I know loyalty feels sacred. And it should. Calibrated loyalty, strategic loyalty, loyalty that is visible enough to inspire and conditional enough to command respect. That is sacred. What is not sacred is the version that costs you everything and asks nothing in return. Your allegiance belongs to your purpose, not to people who have learned they don't have to earn it. Drop this in the comments. My loyalty belongs to me. Because now we arrive at the place this entire conversation has been building toward, the final shift, the one that doesn't add anything to who you are. It removes the last thing that was never yours to carry. You are not the same person who started this conversation. I need you to feel that before we go any further. Something has been quietly dying through every shift we've moved through. The part of you that explained, that reached, that gave without limit, that stayed loyal past the point of return, that filled silences out of fear, that drew lines and then erased them before anyone else even had to ask. That version of you has been losing ground steadily, shift by shift, and what's been taking its place doesn't have a name yet. But you can feel it, that particular stillness, that new weight in your chest that isn't grief, it's density. This is the final shift. And it's not about adding anything, it's about releasing the last thing that was keeping you reachable. Here's the truth. Untouchable is not a personality type. It is not a mood. It is not something you perform on a difficult day when you decide to seem unbothered. It is a structural condition, the result of having done exactly what we've been doing across every shift, dismantling, piece by piece, every external dependency that gave other people leverage over your interior state. And what remains when you've done that work, when you've stopped giving yourself to the ungrateful, converted your pain into architecture, killed the need to be understood, detached from outcomes, enforced your boundaries until they became walls, mastered silence as your primary language, and reclaimed your loyalty as a resource rather than a reflex. What remains is something that has no clean word in the language of self-help, because self-help was never designed to produce it. Sovereignty, not confidence. Confidence can be shaken, not toughness. Toughness is still a response to pressure, which means pressure still reaches you. Sovereignty, the condition of being the final authority over your own internal world, the place where other people's actions, judgments, betrayals, and silences simply land differently. Not because you've gone numb, but because you've gone deep, deeper than their reach. Machiavelli wrote that a prince ought to have no other aim or thought, nor select anything else for his study, than war and its rules and discipline. Strip the militarism. What he meant is this: the sovereign person has a single organizing principle, and everything else is evaluated against it, not against other people's approval, not against whether it will be understood or appreciated or reciprocated, against the internal standard that belongs entirely to them. And when you live from that place, when your decisions flow from your own center rather than from the anxiety of how they'll be received, you become, in the most literal psychological sense, ungovernable. Right? Here is what untouchable actually feels like from the inside, because I think it gets romanticized in ways that miss the point entirely. It doesn't feel like armor. Armor implies something is still trying to get through. It feels more like distance. Not the cold distance of someone who has shut down, but the settled distance of someone who has simply moved to higher ground. Things still happen. People still disappoint. Betrayals still occur, because humans are humans, and that will never fully change. But they happen out there, and you are in here. And the gap between those two locations is no longer something that collapses every time someone applies pressure. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote that fortune is a woman, and it is necessary to keep her under, to beat and maul her, which sounds brutal stripped of context. But what he meant in the political psychology of it is precise. External circumstances will always be chaotic, unpredictable, sometimes violent in their impact. The only variable you actually control is your relationship to those circumstances. The person who has built an interior world stable enough to absorb impact without reorganizing around it, that person is not subject to fortune in the way everyone else is. They are subject to it, yes, but they are not owned by it. And this is the part that changes everything. When you stop being afraid of pain, you become genuinely unpredictable, because fear of pain is what makes people manageable. It's what makes them flinch when you raise your voice, capitulate when you threaten to leave, explain themselves when you go cold. Take away the fear, not through suppression, not through pretending, but through the real metabolized knowledge that you have already survived your worst and came out the other side with more clarity than you went in with. And suddenly, there is no lever, nothing to pull, no angle of attack that reliably produces the response the attacker needs, which, as we covered when we talked about what happens when you detach from outcomes, is the most disorienting thing you can be to someone who was counting on your predictability. And just so we're clear about what this is not the end of feeling. This is not emotional flatness dressed up as power. The people who mistake untouchability for numbness have confused the destination. You will still feel everything. The difference is, it will pass through you now instead of owning you. But none of those experiences will be able to reach down into the foundation of who you are and shake it, because the foundation is no longer made of other people's opinions, or their presence, or their approval, or their continued investment in you. The foundation is made of everything you've survived and chosen and built and released, across every shift we've moved through together. Machiavelli's final and perhaps most human observation was this: that men are driven by two principal impulses, either by love or by fear. And the untouchable person, the truly sovereign person, is driven by neither. They are driven by vision, by purpose, by the internal standard that exists regardless of whether anyone else can see it or validate it or understand it. That is the final evolution. Not to be loved, not to be feared, to be so completely your own, so fully occupied by your own purpose that the question of how others see you simply stops being the organizing principle of your life. No apology, no explanation, no performance, just presence. Absolute, sovereign, ungovernable presence. Before we close, drop this in the comments: nothing can break me. And one more thing, you made it here. Not everyone does. Most people hear the first shift and feel the resistance rise up and they leave, because version 1 is comfortable, even when it's killing you. Comfortable is familiar, familiar feels safe. And what we've been doing across everything you just moved through is profoundly unsafe for the person you used to be. So the fact that you're still here means something already shifted. You already know it. You can feel it in the way you're sitting right now, in the quality of the silence around you, in the fact that certain names came to mind during certain shifts and you didn't look away. That's not coincidence. That's recognition. Here's what I want to leave you with. Not as a summary, because you don't need a summary, you were there for all of it, but as a coronation. You were never too sensitive. You were never too much. You were never the problem in the dynamics that broke you. You were simply operating without the framework that would have protected you, giving your care to people who had learned to consume it, explaining yourself to people who had already decided, reaching toward people who had already shown you their hands, staying loyal past the point of return. That's over now. Not because you became hard. Hard things break. We established that. Because you became dense, pressure-formed. The kind of person that difficulty lands on and slides off of, not because nothing touches you, but because nothing owns you anymore. Machiavelli spent his entire life studying what separates the people who shape history from the people history happens to. And the answer, stripped of all the political architecture, all the strategy and the statecraft, the answer was always internal. It was always about who had built something inside themselves that external chaos could not reorganize. Who had become, in the deepest sense, the author of their own conditions rather than the subject of everyone else's. That is what you just chose. You won't need to announce it. They'll already know. Drop this in the comments right now. I am untouchable now. And if this conversation reached something real in you, if something in here named a dynamic you've been living inside without the language for it, share this. Not for the algorithm, because someone in your life is still in the middle of what you just moved through. And they need to hear this tonight. The version of you that started this conversation would have waited to see if anyone noticed the change. The version of you that finishes it doesn't wait for anything.